Hi guys, Small here. There are a few operators from the Chinese server of Arknights I never got around to reviewing, and since they are heading to global soon, I thought this would be a good moment to catch up. And guess who's first? Narantuya, the stunning red-headed 6-star operator from the Chinese summer event banner, alongside Pepe. She's expected to drop on the global server around mid-January, so get ready to meet her soon. Now, after getting a sniper with a machine gun and another with a water gun, we have come full circle with a sniper who throws daggers and even a shield. Apparently, sometimes you do bring a knife to a gunfight. So what's Narantuya all about? She's a fast-hitting sniper who's a beast in close-range combat, with insane DPS potential in the 8 tiles around her. On top of that, she's got impressive survivability, solid crowd control, and she pairs beautifully with attack buffs. Oh, and don't forget her top-tier AFK skill, it's perfect for when you just want to kick back and let her do her thing. Alright, intro is done. Let's dive into Narantuya's kit and see what makes her shine. Narantuya is a sniper in the loop shooter branch, an archetype with only one other member so far, Caper, a 4-star operator. And before you ask, no, Shirayuki doesn't count, she's just cosplaying as a loop shooter. Sorry to disappoint Shirayuki fans. If you've played around with Caper on the global server, you probably already know what this archetype is about. But if you're new or just never gave Caper a shot, here is a quick refresher. First off, loop shooters share the highest HP stat line in the sniper class, alongside spread shooters like Wet Shen, and they do this while costing about half the DP. Their defense is solid, though their base attack is more average, roughly on par with operators like Wishadel. One of their standout features is their exceptionally wide attack range, which even extends behind them. This gives loop shooters incredible versatility, allowing them to handle multiple lanes at once. But what really defines this archetype is their attack interval, which is tied to their unique boomerang mechanic. Theoretically, loop shooters have an attack interval of just 1 second, putting them on par with operators like XUZA, Ashe and Ela. However, in practice, their attack interval depends on the boomerang. When they attack, the boomerang flies out, hits the target and then returns. They can only attack again once the boomerang is back in their hand. Of course, the boomerang's flight time depends on the distance to the target, so the closer the enemy, the faster the boomerang returns and the higher the attack rate. Take a look at this clip to see it in action. Notice how the loop shooter hits a nearby enemy 3 times in the same span it takes to hit a distant one twice. This is why loop shooters excel at close range combat, where they can approach their theoretical 1 second attack interval, but they struggle at a long range, where the boomerang's return takes longer, lowering their overall DPS. I'm sure you're curious about how attack speed can affect loop shooters' performance, so let's break it down in a bit more detail. The attack process can be split into 3 main phases. First, the loop shooter moves their hand to throw the boomerang. This part is influenced by attack speed. For example, when Narantuya is buffed by X attack speed bonus, you can see her throwing motion speed up slightly. The second phase is the boomerang's flight to the enemy. This part is not affected by attack speed, it's entirely determined by distance. The third phase is the boomerang's return to the loop shooter's hand, which also isn't impacted by attack speed. Some people argue there's a fourth phase, a brief standby pause before the throw. For simplicity, I've included it as part of the first phase. This makes it clear that while attack speed can boost loop shooter DPS, its impact diminishes when the target is far away, because the fixed boomerang travel time dominates the total attack cycle. However, for close-range targets, attack speed buffs make a much bigger difference, since the boomerang spends less time in the air. To drive this point home, let's look at Narantuya when buffed by Hack, who provides a massive plus 50 attack speed. By the way, Narantuya's surviving X skill, albeit with a little RNG, is already impressive. But back to the comparison. At close range, the difference is noticeable. Her attacks come much faster. At longer range though, the improvement is negligible, because the boomerang's travel time still dictates the pace. Interestingly, there's another quirk with Narantuya's skill animation. The number of attacks can vary slightly depending on the direction she's facing. For instance, her animation is slightly faster when she's facing upwards than when she's facing downwards. It's a minor detail, and honestly, most players probably won't notice or care, so I'm not going to dwell much on it. Alright, now that we've covered the archetype, let's dive into Narantuya's kit, starting with her first talent. It's straightforward. Every time she attacks an enemy, she steals 25 attack and 20 defense. This can stack up to 250 attack and 200 defense, capping out after 10 basic attacks. Let's break down these bonuses, because they're genuinely impactful and address some of Narantuya's core weaknesses. Narantuya has a similar issue to Exusiae. She can attack rapidly when enemies are close, but her per hit damage isn't particularly high, which makes her struggle against enemies with high defense. The extra attack from her talent helps her punch through tougher targets by lowering that defense threshold. Now, for defense, Narantuya already has an impressive 2500 HP, and the extra 200 defense makes her even tankier. While she won't outshine dedicated defensive units like phalanx casters, Lim for example, or operators with the unique survival tools like Wishada's camouflage, she's still one of the tankiest ranged operators out there. And mind you, her second talent enhances her survivability even further, but we'll get to that soon. The stealing mechanic isn't just about buffing Narantuya, it actively debuffs enemies too. Removing 250 attack from an enemy is a significant reduction, not just for her but for the whole team's survivability. But arguably the best part is how the stolen defense synergizes with their damage output. As mentioned, a relatively low per hit damage makes high defense thresholds a challenge, but stripping away 200 defense from enemies effectively acts as a built-in defense ignore mechanic. This makes her much more consistent against high defense enemies, smoothing out one of her key weaknesses. So far so good, but now you're probably thinking, okay, that's great and all, but if Narantuya has already stolen 200 defense from one enemy, she won't reduce the defense of any other enemy. That kinda sucks. If that were true, you'd be absolutely right. It would be a huge downside. Fortunately, that's not how it works. When Narantuya hits the cap for her attack and defense steal, she doesn't gain any additional buffs herself, but she still removes those stats from enemies. Need proof? Check out this clip. Narantuya has been attacking this shield bearer long enough to max out her stack. Now we activate skill 1, which makes her attacks bounce between enemies. Notice how each subsequent attack deals more damage to the other enemies. That's because she continues stripping their defense, even though her stacks are already maxed. One more thing about this talent. I've seen some suggestions to stack multiple attack stealers to cripple high damage enemies. Let me clear this up. Multiple steal abilities don't stack on the same attribute. Only the strongest effect takes place. Here is a demonstration. We've got a team with 3 attack stealers, Narantuya, Milsis and Ines, compared to a team with just Narantuya. As you can see, the damage Patriot deals is identical in both cases, so the Moo combo idea doesn't really work. But there might still be a clever way to pair Milsis with Narantuya. Milsis' clone doesn't copy the boomerang mechanic, meaning you get all the benefits of a loop shooter, absurd stats, huge range and a 1 second attack interval without any of the drawbacks. So Narantuya is a fantastic candidate for cloning synergy with Mumu. Earlier, I briefly mentioned how Narantuya's second talent enhances her survivability. Now let's break this talent down. This talent gives Narantuya a 35% chance to dodge both physical and arts attacks, while also reducing the physical and arts accuracy of enemies within 8 ties by 20%. So how does this work? For an enemy to hit Narantuya, they first need to pass an accuracy check with a 20% chance to fail. skill. Then they need to pass a dodge check, which fails 35% of the time. Using probability math, this means an enemy has only a 52% chance to land an attack on Narantuya, giving her an effective dodge rate of 48%. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of RNG-based mechanics, but I have to admit, an effective 50% dodge when enemies are close is seriously impressive. Combine that with their huge HP pool and boosted defense from Talent 1, and you can see why Narantuya is so tanky that even melee operators might feel a little envious. With some luck, she can even handle Patriot's second phase. This talent perfectly complements the loop shooter archetype. Since Narantuya needs to stay close to enemies for maximum damage output, having strong survival tools is a natural fit. But keep in mind that the accuracy debuff only applies to enemies within the 8 tiles around her. The talent also synergizes beautifully with other operators who provide additional accuracy debuffs or dodge buffs. And you know who is a perfect match here? Our favorite community-loved 6-star operator, Crown Slayer. Let's keep the glazing going. Crown Slayer skill 1 gives her a solid 50% dodge, while her talent applies a 20% accuracy debuff around her for the duration of the skill. Here I am assuming that multiple accuracy debuffs stack multiplicatively. This means that, combined with Narantuya's accuracy debuff, Crown Slayer's effective dodge rate is pushed to 68%. Watching her casually tank Patriot's attacks is truly a sight to behold. Meanwhile, Crown Slayer's skill 2 offers a 50% accuracy debuff, meaning Narantuya's effective dodge skyrockets to about 70%. The only downside? It lasts just 10 seconds. Clearly, the devs knew Crown Slayer's kit was already busted enough and decided to rein it in a little. For longer lasting setups, look no further than Ascalon skill 3, which provides the same 50% accuracy debuff, but for a whopping 35 seconds. Watching Narantuya go toe-to-toe with the boss and barely take a scratch is incredible. And no, I didn't rig the RNG to make her look good. This was literally the first take. Finally, let's dive into Narantuya's skills, starting with skill 1. This is a toggle skill, meaning you can switch it on and off at will, with a super short cooldown of just 5 seconds. It's perfect as an idle or AFK skill. When activated, her attack range shrinks slightly to match the standard supporter range. In return, Narantuya gains a huge attack multiplier, and her attacks can bounce to up to 3 enemies. Let me just say, this is hands down my favorite of Narantuya's skills. It's ridiculously strong and easy to use, and I honestly think it's her best skill. Maybe I'm just biased toward AFK setups, but this one really stands out. This skill meshes perfectly with the loop shooter archetype. For starters, you won't miss that extra forward tile in her range, since loop shooters already thrive in close quarters. Plus, one of the archetype's main weaknesses is waiting for the boomerang to return before attacking again. With skill 1, the boomerang bounces between enemies, so there's no need to wait for it to come back. Even better, unlike chain casters, there's no damage drop-off with each bounce. The bounces prioritize enemies that haven't been hit yet. If no new targets are available, it will hit the closest enemy. When only 2 enemies are in range, the boomerang alternates. It hits enemy 1, bounces to enemy 2, and then back to enemy 1, essentially hitting the first target twice. The bounces can chain to enemies within the 8 tiles surrounding each target, while tile gaps will block the jumps. Narantuya's skill 1 boasts a hefty multiplicative attack boost. However, there's a catch. Loop shooters naturally have only average base attack stats, so how do we make that multiplier really shine? The answer lies in attack buffers like Warframe and Cody High Altar, who can crank up Narantuya's attack stat. This increased stat then gets multiplied by the skill, resulting in absolutely devastating damage output. Combine this with the Narantuya's rapid attacks at close range and you've got a recipe for destruction. Very Exusiae-like in its execution. This scaling potential isn't unique to skill 1, it applies across all of Narantuya's skills. The strong attack multipliers on her skills mean they pair exceptionally well with integrated strategy relics or attack buffers. Let's hammer these home with a quick showcase of skill 1 in action. You can even get creative with stainless for hitting enemies far away, though let's be real, this skill and the archetype as a whole thrives in close range situations. Long range setups aren't its strong suit. Skill 1 is a standout as a new gen AFK skill, perfect for clearing stages while you sit back and relax. It's so reliable, in fact, that it might even outperform Logos in some situations, which is saying something. And with the right team setup, even bosses aren't safe from Narantuya's onslaught. Yes, you can literally AFK recent bosses with her, and that's no small feat. As for drawbacks, there aren't many outside of the inherent limitations of her archetype. You need to position Narantuya close to enemies for optimal damage output, and she struggles against high defense foes unless you bring attack buffers to help out. Other than that, this skill is straightforward and effective. Skill 1 is my go-to choice for Narantuya. It's powerful, easy to use and requires minimal management. If you're planning to use her, investing in this skill is a no-brainer. Now let's dive into Narantuya's skill 2. When activated, she unleashes a powerful single target attack with a massive 2.5 multiplier, applying a 1 second slow to the enemy. After hitting the target, her boomerang switches to AoE mode, continuing forward for about half a second before returning, all the while damaging every enemy in its path with a slightly lower multiplier. This skill has the highest attack multiplier of Narantuya's kit, making it the go-to option if you want to use her to deal with high defense enemies. Though keep in mind that this should not be her role. The AoE effect also makes it a great choice for clearing out swarms, giving her excellent flexibility. An added bonus is the extended reach. Since the boomerang continues to travel briefly after hitting the primary target, it can land hits outside Narantuya's already extensive range. Just remember that loop shooters aren't built for true long-range combat, so don't rely on this as a core strategy. Like skill 1, this skill scales beautifully with attack buffs. As you can see in this clip, pairing her with a buffer like Warframe makes a world of difference. Now for the drawbacks. Skill 2 is an offensive recovery skill, meaning Narantuya needs to attack enemies to recharge SP. It's not a huge problem, the skill costs only 15 SP and lasts a solid 30 seconds, but it's something to keep in mind. Let's see some comparisons to other operators for some context. Against medium defense enemies, this skill performs pretty well, even compared to operators like Typhon. Against Wet Chen, however, it falls short in raw power. That said, Narantuya has a lower DP cost and a longer attack range, giving her a different edge. Against high defense enemies, Narantuya does very well when compared to Typhon. The gap between her and Wei Chen is massive, and honestly, that checks out. Handling high defense foes isn't really Narantuya's job. Overall, skill 2 is strong and versatile, but it overlaps somewhat with skill 3 in terms of purpose. Personally, I think skill 3 is a better fit for her archetype, not to mention it's an auto-recovery skill, which makes it more convenient to use. For that reason, I'd recommend prioritizing skill 3 over skill 2 if you are deciding where to invest. Now let's talk about Narantuya's skill 3. When activated, she fires 3 projectiles at a single enemy, each packing a hefty attack multiplier. Once the projectiles return, she unleashes an AoE strike, hitting up to 3 enemies in the surrounding 8 tiles and slowing them for 1 second. If an idle AFK-friendly skill like skill 1 isn't enough to handle a situation, this is Narantuya's weapon of choice. It perfectly capitalizes on the archetype's strengths. Against close-range enemies, she rains down a barrage of fast attacks, then follows up with a devastating AoE explosion that keeps enemies pinned in her range with her slow. The multiple hits also let her quickly stack her first talent, further reducing enemy defense and ramping up her damage output. However, the skill shines only when Narantuya is engaging nearby enemies. If you are targeting enemies far away, the 3 projectiles take forever to return, and the AoE slash may hit nothing at all. Distance is particularly impactful here, as this comparison demonstrates. For large enemy groups, skill 2 might be the better choice, but skill 3 feels more tightly aligned with the archetype's design. It's also amazing against low defense enemies, where Narantuya easily outshines even Exusiae. For instance, check out this showcase against a 0 defense enemy, a scenario where Exusiae should excel. Narantuya doesn't just compete, she dominates. Against medium defense enemies, she continues to impress, holding her own even compared to Ela with her fragility mines. For those curious, a comparison with Typhon's skill 2 and 3 shows how Narantuya stacks up in similar conditions. However, high defense enemies are still a weak spot for her, as you'd expect. Units like Wei Chen operate on an entirely different level in those scenarios, and we don't even need to mention Ray or Walter. That said, she does hold her own pretty well against Ela. The solution? Buffers. With Narantuya's big attack multipliers, adding a buffer can completely transform her performance. A comparison against Patriot showcases just how game-changing this can be. Interestingly, skill 3 is also viable for heli drop strategies. With only a 10-second initial cooldown, Narantuya can start dishing out serious damage almost immediately. After that, the skill costs 30 SP and lasts for 20 seconds, which feels fair for the impact it delivers. Overall, this is the skill I'd recommend for manual gameplay. While I still prefer skill 1 for general use and its sheer convenience, skill 3 is absolutely worth mastering if you enjoy squeezing every bit of power out of Narantuya. Let's wrap this up. Narantuya is an exceptional operator who truly embodies the strengths of the loop shooter archetype. In close-range combat, she is an absolute powerhouse, delivering rapid, high-damage attacks that can obliterate waves of enemies. Her skill 3 adds even more firepower, with strong AoE damage and crowd control, while her natural sturdiness and dodge talent make her a formidable presence on the front lines. She is the very definition of a close close-range monster. For AFK setups, Narantuya's skill 1 is a dream. It's reliable, effective and easy to use. Plus, her scaling potential with relics in integrated strategies makes her a solid pick in this game mode too. Just be mindful of attack speed buffs. Things like the Golden Chalice don't work well with her when she's targeting enemies from long range. Narantuya excels against waves of low to medium defense enemies in close quarters, but that niche also means she faces stiff competition, making her somewhat replaceable depending on your roster. Now, should you pull for her? Honestly, she's not a must-have, but if you do get her, she's a fantastic asset. For new and casual players, she's incredibly user-friendly and powerful, capable of clearing older content with ease, also thanks to her natural tankiness. Skill 1 in particular will make daily content a breeze. Veterans, however, may find her less exciting. She doesn't bring anything groundbreaking to harder content where high defense enemies dominate, and ranged operator survivability often isn't a game changer. Even phalanx casters like Lin, who have more reliable defenses, rarely get used outside the occasional CC map. That said, she's still a solid 6-star, just not a top priority for seasoned players. Looking ahead, a module upgrade could make her even better. Boosting her base stats and first talent might help her handle high defense enemies, making her even more viable. So there's definitely some potential to keep an eye on. Finally, about this limited summer banner. It's fair to say it's been regarded as an easy skip by many. Narantuya is also the standard operator here, so that's even worse. But hey, don't let meta chasers stop you from pulling for a character you love. Follow your heart. And if that heart wants to protect the smile of this fiery redhead waifu, then go for it. Alright, that's my take. Thanks for watching and I'll catch you in the next one.